This is Dr. George. This is Citizens Going Wild, thinking for yourself in an age of hype and glory. And I'm going to do something that you really shouldn't do. I'm going to read what someone else has written. And the reason I'm going to do that is because from time to time, you read something so well done that you know darn well in your heart of hearts you couldn't write as well as this is. And it has to do with the topic I'm going to talk about today, which is who is going to rule us in the future and why I have some doubts about whether it should be Biden. I'm going to start out talking about young people. The conspicuousness of young people, which you see on the news a lot lately, is due to their greater visibility and audibility. They've become more flamboyant, more demanding, more violent, more knowledgeable, and more experienced. In general, they seem to act like the spoiled rich. And they cause a lot of trouble and physical damage, and people like this on the news. Excuse me. Industrialization is the creation of the middle class. It is questionable whether the spectacular mastery of things, the taming of nature on a global scale could have been achieved by other human types except the middle class, who arrived in the middle class because they basically mastered nature. They mastered production. But here's the odd thing. Despite their unprecedented achievements, creating entire societies that were mainly middle class, something that has never been done in the history of the world before recent centuries. The middle class is now on the defensive. It's unsure of its footing. It looks at the news and is not clear what it should do or what it should not do. The middle class is kind of stymied at the moment. The people who are not stymied, who are full of brimming with confidence, are the children, the young people, and the intellectuals. They are certain. And because of this, we suspect that what is waiting for us around the corner is not something new, but an immemorial past. It begins to look as if the fabulous century of the middle class and the Middle Age has been a detour, a wild loop that turns upon itself and ends with a beginning, and ends where it began. We're returning to the rutted highway of history, which we left about 100, 200 years ago, where we rushed to tame a savage continent and turn it into a cornucopia for plenty. We are rejoining the ancient caravan, says this man, Eric Hoffer. A caravan dominated by the myths and magics of the elite, powered by the young. This is basically the way it's been in the past. An aristocracy that tells others how they should live, what they should think. In this country, the coming of the post-industrial age, which we are now in, may mean the loss of all that made America new, the only new thing in the world. America will no longer be the common man's continent. The common people of Europe eloped with history to America and have lived in common law marriage with it, unhallowed by the incantation of men of words. But the elites are finally catching up with us. We can hear the swish of leather as saddles are heaved in our backs. The intellectuals and the young, booted and spurred, feel themselves born to ride us. Did you know there are more students in America than there are farmers? For the first time in America, there's a chance that alienated intellectuals, God knows why they are alienated, who see our way of life as an instrument of debasement and dehumanization, might shape a new generation in their own image. The shaping will be done on college campuses. The young sympathy for the Negro and the poor goes hand in hand with an elitist conceit that pits them against the egalitarian masses. They will fight for the Negro, that was the word used in the 70s, and the poor, but they have no use for the common man who works and moonlights to take care of their own. They see a free-willing democracy as a society stupefied by, they say, the narcotic of mass culture. They reserve their wrath for the institution in which the common man are most represented: unions, Congress, the police, the army. Have you noticed that in the news? One professor says elitism is the great and distinctive contribution students are making to American society. Yet, one cannot wonder how inevitable the future is. Might not the common people, so cowed and silent at this moment, so uncertain, eventually kick up their heels and trample would-be elitists in the dust? There is no earthly reason why the common people, who for more than a century have been doing things here that in other countries are reserved for elites, should not be capable of overcoming the present crisis. In other words, the question is, whose country is this? Nowhere in the world is there such a measureless loathing of educated people for their own country, America. We will see what will happen. Scratch an intellectual most of the time, not when you scratch me, but when you scratch most intellectuals, you find a would-be aristocrat who loathes the sight, the sound, and the smell of the common people. An interesting peculiarity of present-day dissenting intellectuals is the lack of hatred toward the rich. Who do they hate? The government, the Congress, the army, the police, the corporations, and the unions. When is the last time you heard someone in the streets in Portland, for example, crying out for the unions, for their help, for their assistance, how much they admire? Nothing. In the past, there was a lot more yelling at the very rich. Now there is very little, but there's a lot of yelling about the organizations where you see a lot of common people at work. So we're going to have to see what's going on in this country. And we will, perhaps in the coming months, who knows. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I view as the coming and continuing defeat of Western civilization. I'm trying to articulate why having Biden as president makes me feel funny in my tummy. I can't quite get a handle on it. He's not a terrible person. He's not a terrible people either. He seems to have a pretty good heart, seems to be reasonably intelligent and aware, but there's something about him that makes me uneasy. This is my attempt to make a coherent list of why I am uneasy about Biden. He seems blissfully unaware of what I feel is one of the most important issues of our times. Are we going to give up on Western civilization at its best? Our colleges are the best place to view this question of what do we do with Western civilization. On colleges and university, they have, they've disappeared a lot of Western civilization. Instead of having to take 2 semesters of Western civilization, a standard only 50 years ago, Western civilization is not required at all. Western civilization is thought of as being privileged somehow. And so it doesn't need to be taught, shouldn't be taught. And it seems to the intellectuals, to the professors and the administrators, that Western civilization is not something to be greatly desired. Is something to be excused, something to be ashamed of. Western civilization believes such things as there is a moral system embedded in the universe, which is eternal and universal. Whether you believe in the natural law of the Greeks or the God of Jews and Christians, this is the idea. This is one of the mainstays that they have always taught. There's a moral system. It's eternal. And it's universal. You cannot excuse bad behavior in another country. In the eternal fight between equality and liberty, there's been a switch. We used to emphasize that we are the land of the free. And now we emphasize that we would like more equality. And of course, everyone would like more equality. But still, you have to come down on one side or the other. Are you going to emphasize um, are you going to emphasize equality, or are you going to emphasize liberty? Which one is it? There's an eternal battle between the rule of law and the rule of men. And more we see that the emphasis is on the rule of men, when Western civilization has as one of its crown jewels the rule of law. When trying to grasp the nature of men, you should believe that, I believe this, and some others do. When trying to grasp the nature of men, you should believe that, if you are pro-Western civilization, I guess, evil lurks in the hearts of men. That's from a radio show. Or evil is the imagining of the human hearts, my morning prayers. Or man is a wolf to man, Roman philosophers. It is, we believe that man is at least a combination of good and evil. And if one of them rules, it's probably going to be evil. Because we believe we're a combination, we have figured out how to have a free and democratic society. If we only believed in evil, then we wouldn't possibly. The elites would not allow anyone else to vote except them. And if we only believe that we're good, we believe that if left alone by the government, everyone would act well. From watching the television news at 6 o'clock, I doubt it. But there have always been people who believe we can eliminate evil in human relations and have love, love, love all the way down. Because men at best are a combination, we believe in Western civilization, you should build government with checks and balances and let everyone say what's on their minds. We call our version of this Congress. There are other people who believe that we don't need checks and balances. If you will only put them in charge, everything will be good. We live in the first stage where we're ruled by intellectuals and really, really rich people. People richer than the Ming. This is the first time intellectuals have ruled. They've been trying since the French Revolution to get in charge because they believe they are smarter and more moral than other people. And they've gradually taken over entire countries like the United States and many of the countries in Western Europe to a very large degree. Intellectuals create the worldview that answers the really big questions in life. What is good? What is evil? Who will tell me what is good? What is evil? Should I look in the Bible, or should I listen to the professors? What is good and what is evil in a new situation? What is good and what is evil in Portland? What is the purpose of life? Is it to follow the intellectuals? Or is it to imitate Christ as best I can? It is the intellectuals who are the high priests of this new religion. And they decide who will join them and who will not. They create the worldview that dominates a great deal of the world. The intellectuals have a deep distaste for Western civilization in general, and the United States and Israel in particular. The United States, because what? Probably because the United States is the most powerful nation in the Western world. It is the leader of the Western world, whether others like it or not. And I wonder why they don't like Israel. Probably because Israel is an example of what the West can do. You plop them down in the middle of a desert and hard-packed soil without water. You pack in people who are just degraded and slaughtered in Europe. And yet, in a reasonably short period of time, they have a first-class country. And if you mess with them, they smack you in the mouth. I don't think they like that. And I worry. My impression is that they worry that the United States will try and act like that. The main belief of what some have called the new class is faith in themselves. They believe they are morally and intellectually superior to the average person. This can be proved, they say, by saying where you went to school. If it's an Ivy League college, for sure you are superior to other people. Conversion of society into the new world means never ending school, endless instruction. Do this instead of that. Say this instead of that. Use this word, not that word. And it goes on forever. Some people think that there's an end to it. All right, we integrated, we're done. No, there's never an end to it. There can't be an end to it because there was an end to it. What would the high priest do all day? The people need their daily catechism according to the new elite, the new class. In the never ending battle between liberty and equality, they take the side of equality. The intellectuals take the side of equality. People like me, and I hope you, take the side of liberty. We believe, and I think I can prove it historically, that if you made liberty your main value, you will also end up with a great deal of prosperity and a surprising amount of equality. However, if you make equality your first goal, your number one value, you will end up with a tyranny. And I believe that has been shown to be true in places like Russia. The new class, the new elite, the intellectuals believe that before they ruled, mankind saw reality through a glass darkly. But once people are saved, once they believe in the ideas of the new class, they will see the world clearly, and they will accede to the rule of the right thinking intellectuals, nowadays mainly professors. If you want to see what the world would look like under the rule of intellectuals, go to a college campus nowadays. You can see what a world ruled by short fascists looks like. You will hear very little free speech. You will see a lot of intellectual bullying. Use this word, not that word. Say this, not that. You can experience the lack of freedom of thought and endless bullying on a college campus. You can experience the lack of democracy and liberty. Depending on your major, you can have a greater or deeper experience. If you major in something like sociology or anthropology, or God help us, gender studies, you will live in kind of a world ruled by priests, high priests. Under Biden, I am afraid we will feel less democracy. And the reason is I don't think of him as a strong person with a strong direction. And I think more and more power will go over to the elite, partly by going to bureaucrats and partly by going more to the courts. Some people have wondered, why is it there's so much yelling and screaming about abortion when the decision about abortion is decades old, but you don't hear this yelling and screaming in Europe? The reason I would say is that in Europe, they decided on abortion through the legislative body, the voice of the people. You can disagree, but you know, the people, this is how we decide things. They voted and they said, we're going to have abortion. Settle down, live with that. But here it was decided by the courts. And so a lot of people never felt it was decided by the people. More and more decisions are made by the courts. It's incredible now. Whenever the Supreme Court hands down a decision, we all gather around as if they were the voice of God. They were only meant to come in from time to time, and mainly when there were two different opinions amongst the states. Colleges and universities, one of their main reasons for being was to pass on the values of Western civilization. That was one of the three great goals. In addition, of course, most people go to school for a better life afterwards, a middle class life or better. And that's where you learn about your trade, if you want to call being a doctor or a lawyer a trade. One of the other reasons for going to college was to learn about Western civilization and pass it on to the next generation. The professor passed it on to the students, and the students had children, and it was passed on to them, and on and on and on it would go. Now, Western civilization is considered at best irrelevant or not so important. The ideals are now taught to be the ideals of the intellectuals. There is a hostility to the common man on college campuses that is ferocious. There's a hostility to the idea that most people, if left alone, will do a tolerably good job of guiding their own boat by their own lights. And nowadays, there is the feeling, or at least I get the feeling, that the intellectuals feel that the minute I'm let loose, I'm going to do something wrong. I'm going to do something racist, for example. I like the idea that most people, if left alone, will do a tolerably good job. I find that to be true with my neighbors. Most of them seem to be fairly reasonable people. Of course, I don't know what they do at night in their room, but still, most of them seem fairly reasonable. I think they do at least as good a job in guiding their own life as some unidentified, unknown bureaucrat in Washington would do. There is a hostility to the middle class that is palpable on college campuses. And people who haven't been to college might not realize this, but it's the middle class that is loathed, not the rich and not the poor. There's a hostility to Jews. The most fantastic things are said about Jews, things that were literally not said since Hitler was committed suicide. Crazy things like at Rutgers University, professors are being paid with partly my money to say that the Jews are stealing body parts from Muslims. That is known, by the way, as a blood libel, and plenty of Jews have paid with their lives for that lie. Nothing, I mean nothing, is being done to stop anti-Semitism or Israel on college campuses. Wait, there's an exception. When Trump has been president, during the time he has been president, the Department of Education, its Civil Rights Division, have actually gone to various schools where there's a great deal of publicly expressed hatred of Jews and told them that the federal government is not giving them money for them to be anti-Semitic, and if they don't knock it off, they're not going to get any more money. I believe that under President Biden, if he does become president, this effort to stop anti-Semitism on college campuses will diminish, probably disappear. I think we'll also have a pretty dumb foreign policy. Now, we've had a dumb foreign policy, as far as I'm concerned, for decades. It started after the Korean War and went downhill since then. Since then, we have engaged in one war after another. Where we go, we end up with dead Americans, lots of dead Americans, Americans without arms and legs, and Americans who will never have a good night's sleep for the rest of their lives. And then we leave, or sometimes we stay, but nothing changes. We have been in countries like Afghanistan for 19 going soon on 20 years. We have dumb foreign policy in other areas. For example, we gave, and this was during the time of Biden in Washington, money back to Iran, a nasty group of clerics who are the main sponsors of terrorists throughout the world, the main sponsor of terrorism without the world. And we gave them cash. Why did we give them cash? Who needs cash? Who uses cash exclusively? Terrorists. Terrorists don't take checks. Go figure. Terrorists don't use credit cards. Terrorists need cash to operate, to buy weapons, to fly from place to place, to recruit people to help them. Now, some people like Biden have said and will continue to say, well, you know, it's their money. What the hell does that mean? If I find Hitler's wallet, am I obligated to give it back to him? These are nasty customers. I think that there will be some good things. I think there will be better health care for working class people, and that's a good thing. But I think it will also be the end of splendid medical care for the middle class. I think we will have a permanent tribalization of America. It's going to be identity politics that will determine how well you do in life. It will be the government who will be the main figure that will tell you how well you do in life. The government can play a role, but I don't think it should be the main player. There will be a permanent attack on the white middle class's independence. For example, I decide where my children go to school. And if I worked my whole life to get out of this poverty-stricken area to a middle-class area so my children could go to a middle-class school, by God, I don't want you busing them back in. I think that'll be gone. Politics will get more and more vicious because politics will become religion. I think there'll be a curious rise of what I will call fake news, and we'll talk about that, I hope. I think there will be less and less reality-based policies. We will not test our policies. We will not decide. We will not look into how do countries get rich. We will not explore certain questions. I think there will be a growth of Islam in the West, and they will die. A favorable story will be told of them in the news and in our schools. I think political rights will diminish. Freedom of speech will be diminished. I think there will be continued discrimination against white people, including white veterans who lost limbs. And there'll be discrimination against Jews as well. By the way, if you want to call and say anything, you can call 732-876-3367. Those of you who didn't have a pencil and paper ready, here we go again. 732-876-3367. And now first story. This happened, I think, in Wyoming. There was a desperate looking woman stood poised, standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump off. Not bad looking, but she was in despair and she was ready to jump off. An old homeless person was the first one to come by. And he stopped and said, look, you'll be dead in a few minutes. It won't matter to you. How about a quickie before you go? And she screamed, no, no, you filthy bastard. I'd rather jump. And the old scraggly man said, okay, then I'll wait. I'll wait at the bottom. She didn't jump. It shows you good counseling can work. Here are some other little jokes. I am on 2 diets. I wasn't getting enough food on just 1 diet. Here's something to keep in mind when you're talking to people like me. Don't irritate old men. The older we get, the less life in prison is a deterrent. I told my wife I wanted to be cremated. She made an appointment for Tuesday. Always a bad sign. Here is something. I have an appointment with my doctor, and I'm thinking of trying this. Confuse your doctor by putting on rubber gloves at the same time he does. And here's something that happened the other day to me. I picked up a hitchhiker going east on Highway 33 out of Freehold to Asbury. He said, I'm surprised it's getting dark here and you aren't afraid. How do you know that he's not a serial killer? I said, look, the odds of there being 2 serial killers being in the same car is very unlikely. And I have a story of civic engagement that you don't often come across nowadays. This happened in Chicago. In a recent attack on the city's south side, shooters in a Chevrolet Malibu fired 60 times from a car, injuring 15 people attending the funeral of a man who himself had been killed in a drive-by shooting days before, apparently in retaliation from an earlier shooting, according to local reports. But here's the nice part. People at the latest funeral returned gunfire.